Welcome back, everyone, to 101 Questions that Church Planters Ask. I'm your host, Danny Parmelee, and today we have with us Steve Treichler, who is the church planting founding pastor of Hope Community Church in downtown Minneapolis, but also wears a lot of other hats, has been training church planters for 25 some years. You're the Upper Midwest director of Acts 29 as well, too. And even has a D-Min. So got an MDiv from Bethel and a D-Min. So, we should all call him doctor. But here's the thing. Most importantly, he's really the life of the party. If you see Steve at any church planting gathering, that's where the fun is. That's probably what's most important. So Steve, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure, bud.
All right. So today we want to answer the question of, who's out there that's going to destroy the church plant? Now, this is a whole podcast about questions that church planters ask. And honestly, most of them don't ask this question, but they should. So we're kind of asking it for them. So we'll just kind of, I'll kind of kick it to you, and you can kind of just, speak to that of, who are some of those people?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I look at church plants over the last 25 years that I've been involved with, I would say, I don't know hardly any church planters that have lost their jobs because of bad theology or can't preach right or whatever. The reality is most of them end up crashing and burning because they can't lead their way through some very, very difficult people. And so it's a great question. And I think when I think about this, I think it goes way back to the very beginning. I think everybody's just so excited to get those people on the team. I just got to get my core group or launch team or whatever you young people are calling it nowadays. You just got to get that bad boy to, you got to get that thing to 25 or 40 or whatever number you want, and you just in this enthusiasm, you just think, I'm just going to get as many people as I can. And the reality is you have a one-time opportunity to filter out people that could destroy your church from the beginning. And a lot of people don't take that advantage because I just need bodies. Hey, listen, I started Hope Community Church in 1996 with 14 people. I mean, I know it sounds quintessential. We did sit in my living room, the whole thing, right? But I'd rather have 14 people who are bought into the mission than 50 that are kind of bought into the mission. And so when I think about this, I think there's two main categories of people that I would put. And then in the second category, I would put at least three types of people. So the two categories are this. First off, there's just wolves. There are people that are coming in and they have some semblance of knowing they are there to ruin this thing. And I would say they are not believers. They might pose as that, but there's a certain element to them that you can tell right away that there's just something in your spirit that says something's not right here. And so the wolves are there, and they're trying to destroy the thing. That's their aim. And a lot of times you can figure it out from their past history. You'll listen to them and you'll hear about the churches that they were a part of. And one of the things that I think young church planters think is, oh yeah, our church is going to be so awesome. People like this can really find grace and healing and love. You got to not hear that. What you've got to hear in that list of dead bodies of churches that they've been to is, you're next.
Right.
That's what you've got to hear. And so when those type of people are coming, you just have to keep let them going. And do not let them get engaged. Now, you can't stop them from coming to the actual church, but you can do whatever you can to keep them from being influential in the center. I'll come back to what do we do with all these kind of people in a little bit. The other kind are what I would just call well-intentioned people. They have really good intentions, and they seem like really nice folks. They're believers. They love the Lord, but they always have concerns.
Oh, I love that word. It's one of my favorite words, concerns. We have a concern, Pastor.
Pastor, I just have a few concerns. And I'd put those into three categories. The one is just the disgruntled person, okay? So there's a lot of times there's life situations that are going on. Perhaps there's a bad marriage. Quite simply, a lot of times it's just people with young kids, and they're just not getting any sleep. They're sleep deprived. Maybe there's an illness, financial situation, but nothing's making them happy. And so therefore, there's no way you're going to make them happy. So they're well-intentioned, right? They think they have good intentions. So they're coming and they have these concerns, but they're just kind of, and you can, disgruntled a person. I'll show you the thing here. So, and you have to look at my face on this. When you talk to them, they kind of go, that's the face.
Yeah.
It's this, well, yeah, but you're not getting it, right? No, I'm getting it. You're
and
just...
let me interject. This is a podcast. Most people are listening. However, you can go to the blog and watch this on YouTube, and you want to see Steve's face.
Yeah,
this is important. If you know this is going to save you just years of heartache. So
yeah, it's kind of the it tilted the head a little bit. You're scrunching your eyes and it kind of look at you like, nah, I don't think you get it, Pastor. Then there's the kind that what I would call are the the nice bulldogs. In other words, they have an issue most likely I agree with. Let's take like an addition, like, are we pro-life? Yeah, yes. Well, I vote. Yes, we're pro-life. But what we've decided to do in being pro-life is we are actively involved in some proactive ways with Crisis Pregnancy Center, have been for 25 years, and doing that as opposed to having signs and banners and all this kind of thing. And for some of these nice bulldogs, no matter what you do, it's not enough. And so therefore they've got an issue, and that's how they're filtering everything else. Yes, they preach the gospel. Yes, people are coming to faith. Yes, we see baptisms. Yes, we do this and that and the other thing, but they don't really do enough on this. And they're just not quite measuring up. Okay.
I'm going to even just throw in there the kind of red flags are sometimes homeschooling and immunizations. When that comes their first question in core values and you hear that, it's like, okay, we can't even have an opinion on that. However, this church is not about driving either of those agendas.
Yes. Amen. Amen. So those folks are there as well. Then the last group are the one that I would just call the overly cautious. They are, they're always the type that are, no matter what you're trying to do, they are just super cautious on everything. And they're the ones that if you have multiple of them, and this is my deal, whenever I have teams of people, I want a cautious person on that team. I always do, because somebody's got to be a little bit of the ballast to the balloon, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't want two of them. And here's why. What happens in a meeting is you throw out some crazy idea. You know what? We should buy this skyscraper and see it for the glory of God. And the next person that talks is the cautious person. Well, how will we afford that? The next person that talks is the way the conversation's going. And if it's that other cautious person, game over. And the deal on this is, leader, is you can't be the next person that talks, because otherwise it's just a ping pong match.
Right.
When you have those people in the room, you've got to have a dynamic happening, and you've got to let the next person talk. And if it's a cautious person, game over. Now, buying a skyscraper is a stupid idea, but the idea is whenever we're moving out there, and if you get too many of these cautious people, and listen, all these people are what I would consider well-intentioned. Every church split that I know has come from well-intentioned people. There's this concern, this thing, and then there's this reaction, and then it falls apart. And so that is the wolves. The wolves are relatively easy. You just shoot a wolf, right? You go wolf hunting. You just get rid of them. You expose them and you get rid of them. What gets complicated, pastor, leader, church planter, is how you lead and how you shepherd and how you rebuke these well-intentioned people through these things.
Okay, so you gave us a little bit of how to maybe identify kind of don't even have them on your launch team type of thing. But what happens if you don't recognize this until later? So let's say you're 6 months in, let's even say you're 2, 3, 4 years, and someone didn't start out as a wolf, or you didn't, recognize that, or someone maybe didn't start out with all of these concerns or have hidden agendas, but it starts to kind of bubble up? How do you approach that?
Yeah, and I think one of the in God's wisdom, everybody parents children, and they don't have any experience at first, right? And so you learn a ton, and you go along. And so I think it's the same in church planting. Those of us who've gone through it many times, we're not the ones planting churches now. It's the new guy, the new couple, and of course they're not going to see that. I mean, they're not going to have the wisdom on seeing this, because wisdom comes from experience, and you just don't get it. And so, yes, I promise you, you will have these. Now, even if you do the very best job of filtering everybody out in the beginning, they're still going to come.
Yeah.
And especially if your church is new in a community that hasn't had a lot of new churches, believe me, now these people are
right.
there. It's like a magnet for a lot of these people. So you are going to have them. No question about it. You are going to have them. And I think there's a couple things that I would highly, highly recommend. Number one, get around a seasoned pastor or church leader or someone who has experienced this to help you walk these through, whether that's a mentor or a church planting coach or someone who's further down the road than you and can help you to walk through these things, because you've never done it before. You have no idea. Like I say, these people, they seem like their hearts are good and they have good concerns, but they're actually becoming divisive people. And like, how do you navigate that? So number one, man, it is so important to it is so important to get someone around you who has wisdom and a coach or that kind of a thing. So lean into that hard. The second thing I would highly recommend is do not think that if I just leave this alone, it'll go away.
Right.
That's the worst mistake you can make, because it doesn't just go away. In fact, it actually grows. And what'll happen there is what these folks they'll come to you with this. Let's say they have a semblance of godliness. They will say, I have this concern, but I know that I shouldn't talk to others, so I'm going to go talk to the pastor. And they talk to you, and you say, oh man, I totally agree with your issue. It's just, here's how we're responding, and that's what we're going to do. And they don't like it. Now, it is a rare thing that person will say, okay, and I'll submit to that. No, they'll think, yeah, you know what? I have the Spirit of God too, and I think this is a problem. So now they do what is the worst thing, which is called triangulating. In other words, they don't go to you anymore. They go to someone else. And they always stated something like, I really love our church, but and there it starts. It's a little comment at a small group. It's a little comment at a mentoring thing. They're all working out, and they'll say, I wish our church did more about Save the Whales or whatever, right? And what happens then in triangulation is they start to form these groups, this thing where it actually starts to subvert the entire church. In fact, in organizations, if you triangulate in business organizations, it's cause for immediate dismissal.
Right.
Especially in the military, right? So, I mean, you are heavily, if you are not allowed to, most other groups have a phrase, it rhymes with itching. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, but people mask this in the church under, I have a concern. I have the spiritual gift of discernment, and something isn't quite right here. And instead of saying, no, we are to submit to our leaders. And that doesn't mean yes, sir, but it does mean I brought it to them. They gave me an answer. It's not what I liked, but I'm gonna move that way. And so I am saying you need to engage this. And if it gets to triangulation, slandering, gossip, or tearing down, now you've got where I would think you'd have a Titus 3 situation where it talks about warning that divisive person once. And after that, have nothing to do with them. I mean, what I think most church planners don't want to do is that if you have a situation where there's some massive sexual sin or financial impropriety, they deal with it, right? But they don't deal with triangulation, gossip, slander, tearing down. They don't deal with that. It's like, well, they're good people. They love the Lord, and they just have these concerns. It's like, dude, that will destroy your organization.
Mm-hmm. How do you coach church planters in that balance of the wolf hunting and the shepherding. In other words, yes, the easy ones, the big, the sex, the money, those types of things. Like, man, this is an issue. Lop it off. You're out, type of thing.
Yeah.
Determining so that all of a sudden you're not too scared. And you're going around and you're not shooting wolves. You're shooting sheep that just needed a little nudge in the right direction. Or how do you do that? Do you start with a small nudge, see if they start going in the right direction? How do you, what coaching do you give them to be pastoral, both firm and yet full of grace?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you mentioned that we're part of Acts 29. And I think in the early days of Acts 29, everybody that disagreed with you was a wolf.
Yeah.
I mean, just shoot them, right?
Which, by the way, that Mark Driscoll's who I actually wanted on this episode. So you're number 2.
Yeah, I'll live with that. Mark's a friend.
All right. Good,
that's good. And I've never have been a Driscoll basher or anything like that. I think Mark's great. With some things he needed to learn and needs to learn. Sure, we all do.
Yeah.
But
so like you said, in the early days, exactly that was it.
That was it.
So.
And I think, and then a lot of guys kind of imprinted on that. And anybody who disagreed with you for any reason was just a wolf. They were there to, and I'm like, yeah, wolves come along pretty infrequently. And I think, yeah, that is one of the tools in your tool chest here is the 12 gauge shotgun to take out the wolf. But man, very infrequently. However, I think some of these well-intentioned people can start good and they can actually get to the point where they're doing as much damage as a wolf.
Yeah.
Now I don't, this is my big thing. I don't need to discern people's spiritual, like, are you Christian or not? I don't need to do that. I can easily tell though, you are destroying the church. And I can see that if you are not living in a sense of community and in a sense where, of course, we're not going to agree on everything. Heck, I don't even agree with myself a year ago on certain things, right? But the way that Scripture has allowed things to go is that, yeah, there's godly, humble, but firm leadership in the church. And people need to say, yeah, that's not exactly my preference. That's what submission means. Yeah. Submission means this isn't exactly my preference, but for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of community, I will lay down preference. By the way, you cannot live in community. You cannot actually love others if you're not constantly laying down preference. Think about being married, right? The whole idea, Christ being the example in Ephesians 5. What did he do? He went to the cross. That wasn't his preference, but he did it because he loved the bride of Christ. And so this is what happens in a church situation. It happens even to leaders. You know this full well, Danny. I mean, you've had to lay down your own preference at times for the sake of the body. So I think when people start to get that and start to realize that you create a culture where that's happening. The other thing you have to do is you have to create a culture where you're working through conflict, because most people didn't grow up in that situation and didn't go to churches like that. The way you did conflict was you just blew things up, got to a microphone and started yelling. And so instead of saying, hey, no, let's, I don't know, I've got a crazy idea. Maybe let's do this behind closed doors, maybe mano a mano, or get another person in there where we can just talk and start to create that culture.
Wait, so can I say that you should or should not be taking your confrontation onto Facebook and Twitter and everything else? I mean, it seems kind of obvious to me. However, I've seen it happen with church plants and churches that people start bringing their gripes, both the pastor and the congregation members.
I don't know how many people actually think they're doing a service when they do that. I cannot even. It is the stupidest thing. Yeah, it seriously is the stupidest thing. If you just follow the pattern of Matthew 18,
right?
Okay, Facebook would be like the last thing. It's like the nuclear bomb option, or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. So I mean, but people start there, and I just can't even believe it. Yeah. It's like, are you kidding me? Now you've just expanded this instead of where the Matthew 18 pattern is a beautiful pattern that basically says, I love you, and all the time, all of us need correction. And so we're in this, and we're going to do this in the least damaging situation as possible. Yeah. But But when they go all the way over here to the other extreme, yeah. So, and I know right now we live in a rage culture, right?
Right.
Everything's turned up to 11. And it is our job. It is our job, I think, as leaders to create a culture where we are going to say, you know what? The rest of the world does that. Jesus said to his disciples when they asked him about who was going to be the greatest, he says, the Gentiles do that. But then he said 4 words that haunt me. And I love these 4 words. He said, not so with you. Hey, that's the way the world lives, man. The world lives in a rage culture. You know what? Not so with you. I'm going to have Democrats and Republicans in my church. Are they going to get along? Yes, they are. Why? Because not so with you. You're going to have civil discussions about the issues and not name calling, throwing out terms on each other. We're going to start doing. Now, you start to create that culture, and some of these well-intentioned people in the world start to look at it going, oh, this is not a safe place for me.
Right.
I have got to scatter. Now, with all that said, there are going to be times when you're going to need to have the talk where you sit down with someone and say, right now I'm going to list the ways that you've been triangulating and gossiping and causing division, and you are going to cease and desist. You are not going to do this anymore. And if you do, we are going to take it up another level. And so I just think that the church has put up with that way too long, and it's not helpful to anyone. So you've got to act on it.
That's great. Final question. When it comes to that point and there needs to be the talk, or it goes even beyond that, the person needs to leave, it's very, very clear. Anything to kind of minimize the collateral damage. In other words, like, okay, well, this person who left, maybe they even had a leadership position, if not a position, they had influence. How do you, what do you tell a church planter? Say, here's some things to do and not do so that you don't also create a church split and lose a bunch of people.
Yeah. And we planted in 96, so we're 24 years old now. And we've had our fair share of these like everybody. And I think the hard thing about it is, as an organization, you have to take the higher road. And to quote a good friend of mine who had been through about 4 of these in a matter of 5 years, he said, I'm sick of being the better man. Yes, you are, but you need to be the better man. In other words, you're going to take shots. You're going to get things said about you, maybe publicly or privately to others, that is unfair, but you do need to do that. However, with that said, you need to make sure that your leadership, whatever structure you have, your elder team, or in our case, we have executive elders because our elder team is 20 people or something. But I mean, and your key staff, and all, they need to be in the know exactly what's going on. Because what everyone says, maybe they called me out on this, okay, but I didn't like the process. Everybody says that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, you need to make sure that process is actually documented. Here's what we did. Here's when we did it. Here's how we did it, as much as possible. But no, I'm not going to stand up on a Sunday and share that with everybody. But I can stand up and say, these things are tough. We had hard conversations. They are documented, but it's private. It's only for the leadership and we have a governance team in our church. It's their responsibility. But you know what? It is the thing that keeps me up at night, no doubt about it. It is the thing. When I think of suffering for the kingdom, the number one thing is dealing with well-intentioned people, oftentimes on your staff, that you've got to remove, or you've got to let go, or you've got to make a transition, and they didn't take correction, and it is rough. I mean, it is. So everybody who's listening to this, I'm already praying for you in advance because I know, but you need to do it. You absolutely need to do it.
Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you so much for being a guest. Thank you, everybody who has tuned in. Remember, if you have a question, you can go to churchplantersask.com and you can submit your question there. And until next time, keep asking those questions. See you later.